My name is Mr. Lewis. I am a social studies teacher at a middle school in Arizona. I've been doing this job for about 23 years now, but I majored in humanities and with a history teaching emphasis. And that's always been my love. That is kind of what pushed me into teaching, actually, is how much I loved my humanities and art history classes in high school. And it motivated me to go ahead and do that in college. The other thing that motivated me is I ended up living in Italy for a couple of years, right, not too long after high school. And so that was in the mid-90s, mid-1990s, so 30 years ago. It was just a little over 30 years ago that I landed in Italy and spent the next couple of years there. But I'm going back for the first time since then. So it's been about, well, close to 30 years, I guess, now since I've been in Italy. And so as I've been planning this trip, I've been thinking about all the cool things that I'm going to get to see with my lovely wife. We both turned 50 this year, so we thought we needed to do this full-on major trip. So anyway, all right, thanks. We got in the chat. Angelo says that his humanities course was one of his favorites. Good job, Angelo.
Thanks, Angelo.
One of my favorites as well, of course. So anyway, let's. I've been doing this YouTube channel now for, when did we start this, Mrs. Lewis?
End of August.
End of August, and made a lot of videos. Usually they're little daily, today in history. Here's what happened on this particular day in history videos. That's mostly what I have. I have some other ones that are on some other history topics. I even have a few on art that I have done. But this is the first like live stream big art. Well, live stream anything that I've done. Are we ready to start?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to get them on screen with us, but I will get their questions.
Okay. So one of the big reasons, well, how this all came about, doing this live stream, and there were a few misunderstandings. Mrs. Lewis and I may have had the first argument of our marriage over this. Does that sound about right?
Right, probably.
Yes. So anyway, I have been saying ever since we started planning this trip, well, I forgot to tell you that Mrs. Lewis's brother and his wife, so my brother and sister-in-law, are coming with us on this amazing trip to Italy. And so I had this great thought, me being a teacher, I like to teach. So I thought, hey, to enhance our visit, I would really love to be able to do a crash course in art history for the other three people who are coming along, who maybe aren't as well versed in the history of art as the nerd humanities major that you see on screen is. I mean, that's logical. And I had actually made a presentation for my neighbor who a few years back, my neighbor and his wife, the two of them were going to Italy. They were going to spend some time, especially in Rome, and I think they spent some time in Florence as well. And we were having a conversation, and I mentioned, hey, maybe I could come over before you guys go and give you this little crash course. And he said, well, that would be great. And so I did, and I feel like it was successful. I feel like that their trip to Italy was only worthwhile and enjoyable because of my preparations for them. Probably not, but they did appreciate it. And so when we decided we were making this big trip to Italy, I thought, hey, maybe I could do something similar. And then Mrs. Lewis got this great idea yesterday. Hey, why don't we make it a live stream on YouTube? And I misunderstood what I thought she was talking about, something else about, like, points and miles and stuff that she was going to do a live stream about. And I thought, well, that's fine. You could do that. And so I said, sure, okay, this is all through text. And as it turns out, that I was saying okay, she thought, to agreeing to doing this live stream that I didn't even realize was part of it because I was in class teaching, and so I was just kind of glancing at the phone and didn't get the whole rest of what this message was about until lunchtime at work. And then I was a little panicked because I felt like I wasn't quite prepared to do this as a live stream. But hey, we got it ready. We're ready to go.
We're so ready.
We ironed out our differences. We patched up our relationship. It wasn't that bad.
Totally.
So anyway, here we are. Okay. Do we have people?
We have people. Let me try and find the.
Right. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law that are coming on this trip, we definitely want to have them in this. Oh, a couple of other things. So I've taught at times in my 23 years of teaching. I have taught world history classes, and I've always tried to infuse art history into all of my classes, but especially those world history classes. That's where I feel like it really packs a punch. It's hard to learn about the ancient Greeks or the Renaissance or those time periods. If you gotta go with the art. You got teaching a world history class where we went from ancient times all the way up to modern times. And so I incorporated a lot of art history into that course. And I have a number of students who really, it's funny because when you first start teaching them about art and you're telling them we're learning about art, there are a lot of groans, especially from the boys. They think it's going to be dumb and that they're not going to like it. And then they all turn out to most of them really love it. And I had this student actually recently who just messaged me, a former student from like 20 years ago, who recently messaged me on Facebook. He's like, hey, Mr. Lewis, I'm in Rome. I'm in Rome right now. And I still remember those lessons and those things I learned. I really appreciate that because it's making this experience better. And that was cool. That was a cool message to get. There's another young lady. She's young compared to me for sure. She's a teacher now. She teaches social studies 2 doors down from me. And she was my former student back in the day, many years ago, 15-ish years ago. And she also has mentioned how she very much appreciates what she learned, and what she remembers most from my class was the art. And so I feel like I'm really looking forward to doing this. Okay. Do we have them yet?
They are getting on, but they'll be on the chat, so you're good. Yeah, they'll
okay.
You just get started.
So are we? One thing I wanted to mention is that my brother-in-law has this great podcast that he does about.
Yeah, we'll get it in the description.
About men's mental health that you might want to look into wherever you do your podcasts. How would they find this, dear? You're going to put a link? We're going to put a link in the description about that. I have enjoyed listening to it, a lot of great insight in that, and so I highly recommend that as well. Okay, so please feel free to ask any questions or make comments in the chat. One very important thing to know is that there's a document that you will need to download. Okay, and there's there a link for it?
There's a link
I see it.
in the chat and in the description.
There's a link in the chat and in the description for a document. You will definitely want to download this. It's just a PDF. It's got a lot of pictures. It's hard to talk about art and that without pictures. And we don't know enough about how to do a live stream and don't have the equipment or whatever we need or the software. This was so thrown together last minute that I don't have a way to put that on my screen. I'm sure that at some point, if we start making this a more regular thing, we will get that all sorted out. But for today, you're going to want to download this document. It's got numbers,
Do it.
and you're going to want to view it. It's just a PDF, so just click on it, and it'll pop up as a PDF, and you'll follow along on that document. So make sure that you do that. If you don't have the document, most of what I'm going to tell you is not going to make any sense. So make sure that you do that. So anyway, again, this is hopefully something that would enhance anyone's experience going to Italy. We're going to primarily be visiting 3 of the major Italian cities, Florence, Rome, and Naples on our trip. So it's geared a little bit more towards those places, but not just to those places, because it's universal for understanding art in Italy, art and architecture. So also, this video will be available live after the live stream, because you're going to want to go back and watch it over and over again. I mean, many times. Who wouldn't? Okay, so most of the artwork that you're going to see here is in Italy, and much of it is stuff that we will be seeing on our trip. Like I said, some of it's not in Italy, but it relates to things in Italy, so that's why I have it in there. So hopefully you've all got this up. Hopefully you've got this document up. The very first page there you see is me wearing this very shirt that you see, and wow, that looks great. Mrs. Lewis, you did a great job with that starting screen thing there. Nice work, nice work. Okay, so here we go. Let's start by talking about the Greeks. And you might think, well, why are we starting with the Greeks if we're learning about art in Italy? Well, here's why. Southern Italy was settled by Greek people. There were, of course, already people there, but the Greeks, at the height of their power, you might say, around 500 BC-ish, a little before and some after, settled in southern Italy. In fact, the city of Naples comes from Greek. It comes from the word Neapolis. So when they settled, they started this new city there in southern Italy, and they came up with a really clever name for it, which was Neapolis, which literally means new city. Okay, so the new city's name was New City. That stuck. That's Naples, or as they say in Italy, Napoli. And so there's a lot of Greek stuff in and around Naples, some amazing Greek sites there. And so that's part of it. But the other reason is, see, the Romans conquered Greece. And this was finished up maybe around 146-ish BC. And the great Roman poet Horace said of this that captive Greece took Rome captive. Again, captive Greece took Rome captive. It's a clever expression, but the idea is, yes, the Romans conquered Greece, but Greek ideas, Greek art, Greek architecture, Greek thought captivated the people of Rome. And so most of the sculptures that you're going to see today, and most Greek sculptures that you'll see anywhere in the world, are actually marble copies of the Greek originals, marble copies made by the Romans. So the Romans, they stole a lot of art from Greece and brought it back to Italy. The Romans did, but they also would make copies of those original Greek statues, which most of the Greek freestanding statues were made out of bronze. And that bronze is almost all melted down and used for something else. Probably weapons to kill people. That's kind of how this worked. So the original bronze Greek statues are mostly lost. But the Roman copies survive because you can't really melt down the marble and use it for something else. It doesn't work that way. And so these Roman copies of these Greek originals have survived to this day. And many, 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 many of the great Greek art pieces are today found in Italy. Okay? So we're going to be seeing a lot of those on our trip, as you will if you make an amazing trip to Italy as well. So let's start off with something that's not a copy. We're going to start off with vase painting. So we're on slide number 2 right now, and slide number 3. So if you kind of want to scroll back and forth between 2 and 3, this is the period known as the geometric period in ancient Greek art. And this period was from maybe about 900 BC to about 700 BC. A couple of things to note here. The reason we call it the geometric period should be pretty obvious. We got a lot of geometric shapes. It's very simple. And the figures that you see are very simple as well. You'll see some things that look like, I don't know if they're flamingos on slide 2. I don't know what those are. There's a thing that almost looks like a poodle sort of looking bird thing in the background. This reminds me of some of the art that my students do. It's not top of the line. But it does add something interesting to these vases. And you see on this pottery, you see all of the geometric designs. The one on 3 is a much more impressive piece just in general. The vase itself, but also the intricate geometric designs and some attempts at even some people there. Their torsos are pretty much wedges, but you can tell they're people, so there's some effort that's gone into that. There's not a real understanding of how to represent the human body artistically yet. So that's the geometric period. Those are the very earliest. Notice all the figures are black. That's a feature too that you're going to see with ancient Greek vases, the black figure versus the red figure. And anyway, so let's move on now to the next period. That's the Archaic period, we call it. That's the second of the 4 major periods of Greek art. The Archaic period we're looking at from about 700 BC to about 500 BC. And around 500 BC, this is important because this is when Athens starts to become a significant power, not just in the Greek world, but beyond what we would consider the Greek world, the Aegean Sea area. Okay, so Athens is starting to come into its own, and that's kind of what brings about the end, you might say, of this Archaic period. But anyway, we're looking at slide 4 here, first of all, when we're talking about Archaic vases, okay? And if you look at this particular vase, this is the inside of the bowl, essentially. And you'll notice here, there's a much better understanding of the human figure and of these animal figures, much more realism. It's very flat, though. There's no sense of like modeling or shading or depth in this particular image. And if you look at it there, that winged horse, you probably think is who, Mrs. Lewis? Not Perseus, but Pegasus. That is Pegasus. So that must mean, you learned this from Disney, right? Who is the guy down there doing the stabbing then?
I didn't learn it from Disney.
Where'd you learn it from?
I didn't learn anything.
You didn't learn it at all. You might think, well, that must be Hercules, because wasn't he with Pegasus? Wrong. You were going to say it and you would have been wrong. Wrong, Disney. Hercules did not have Pegasus. Pegasus is in no way connected with Hercules. Thanks, Disney. Problem number 1. Problem number 2, you might think, oh, it's Perseus, because remember Clash of the Titans? Wrong, Clash of the Titans. It is not Perseus. It is the Greek hero Bellerophon. Bellerophon. That is who rode Pegasus. And Bellerophon is famous for slaying the Chimera, which is a beast that is part lion, part goat, and part snake. That's a weird combination. Oh, and I guess when you combine those 3 animals together, you breathe fire, because the Chimera also breathed fire. So this is, what?
Angelo said his guess was Perseus. So.
Yeah, well, you failed, Angelo. Bellerophon. We are going to see the fountain of Bellerophon in Avellino.
Very nice.
Anyway, it will not breathe fire, in case you're wondering, Mrs. Lewis. So don't worry about that. Anyway, you were worried about that? Don't worry about it. So this is the slaying. Okay, now we have some weird things going on here. We have some good effort. One problem for Bellerophon that I'm noticing as far as the lack of realism is the thunder thighs. They're intense. He has a very large derriere. This is like a roided up baseball player kind of derriere. Am I right? There's an attempt at a kneecap, which I think is impressive. It looks kind of like a spider or some other bug. There's an attempt at a kneecap. The other thing that I think is interesting on this particular work is that the death of the Chimera is like when you were a little kid and you were like playing war or whatever. When you die, what would you do? You'd stick your tongue out. You'd go, ah. Well, that's what the Chimera is doing. I guess that tongue out is telling us that the Chimera is dying. So, This is definitely a step up artistically from the Archaic period, but we got a ways to go. Okay, moving on to slide 5 and 6. Okay, 5 and 6, these are actually Egyptian works. And why do we have Egyptian works? Well, Egypt is just across the Mediterranean from Greece, and Egypt was this great empire that started thousands of years before Greece was much of anything. And so, not surprisingly, the Greeks who traded with the Egyptians are heavily influenced by the great Egyptian world. And so we're going to look briefly at these two Egyptian sculptures on slides 5 and 6, pages 5 and 6 that you have there, to try to understand how this influences the Greeks. So a couple of things. I would say that much of the upper body is pretty good here. The faces are excellent, very realistic. The hair, maybe not so much. The woman has a kind of a manly upper body. Notice the tiny, tiny hips. There's basically no hips. And then when the legs come out from this kind of skirt that the man is wearing there, it's like explosion of the lower leg. And there's this interesting and odd crease that runs down the front of the leg. This is very typical with these Egyptian sculptures. If you look on 6, you see a very similar thing, that extra tiny waist, no hips, and then legs that awkwardly explode out of the bottom there, okay? Also notice the feet. There's a serious cankle problem that you'll notice with these people. They probably need to make sure that they're wearing compression socks or something to try to get those ankles, the blood flowing there, so we don't have that collection down there by the ankles. So they have like very old person cankles going. And this is very typical of Egyptian sculpture. The other thing is just the stiffness of the sculptures. Okay? They are standing in a very awkward position. Okay? And we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Let's move now to...
We have some comments.
Oh, what do we have for comments?
Well, Cassie says probably back to the guy with...
He's thick? Quick? Yes.
And then Rachel says that she has thinner thighs, which I said I do too. And then
I do not. I have delicate thighs.
thick thighs save lives. But then Angelo just said no hips, so the hips do lie.
They do lie. They do. All right. So, moving on now to number 7. This is a Greek sculpture side by side with that Egyptian one that we just looked at. This is from the Greek Archaic period. Again, this is about 700 to 500 BC. And already, I think we see they're copying they're inspired by the Egyptians, but they're making some major headway when we're talking about representing the true human form. Okay? Number 1 on number 7, straight up nude. Okay? This is typical, and we don't say naked. Okay? In art, it's nude. That's the proper expression, not naked. Okay? You're nude. It's better. All right. I don't know why I did British on that, but I did. The sculpture is nude. This man, he's, I would say, pretty similar to my physique. I think Mrs. Lewis would probably agree, like just the definition of the muscles there, that's pretty close to myself. What's interesting is the face is gone backwards. The face is very stylized. You have those weird eyes and the like. If you zoom in on his hair, it's like Cheerio hair. Like, not kidding. It's Cheerios. But the hips now are not lying, Angelo. And the muscle definition is extremely well done. The kneecap is much better. The cankles are pretty much gone. There's still that weird crease from the knee down to the bottom of the foot. But notice the definition on the calves. Again, pretty much like my calves. It's very, very well done there. Very realistic if you work out a lot. Okay? Now, if you go down to slide 8, these are the female, those are called Koros statues, and the female ones are called Kore statues. The female one, they're always clothed. So this is the weird thing, because I would feel like the other way would be superior, but that's not how it is. The male figures are nude, the female figures are clothed. And this is the point where I want you to kind of go back and forth between 7 and 8. And I want you to think about which sculpture do you like better, the female one or the male one. And when I would ask this to my class, they would all admit that they liked the male one better. And then that was a chance for me to say, so what you're telling me is you would prefer to see a nude male over a clothed female. And this was a little awkward for some of the guys in the room, but they had to admit that that was the case. And this is part of how I would help explain. This is why the sculptures are done in the nude. There's nothing perverted about it. It's about you can see everything. And by seeing everything, you see the beauty of the form and you see details that you cannot see, muscle definition and everything else. This clothed figure, quite frankly, is boring. And the nude figure, the male figure, is interesting, okay? I'll move on from that now. But here's what I do need. I'm going to need some assistance because I need to stand up. And I need all of you to stand up. This is important in illustrating what I'm trying to illustrate here. I look great right now.
I'm going to step back here.
Okay. So, you got to stand up. That's the only way this is going to work. And can you get it to where you can see pretty much all of me? Yeah, don't do that.
No. Here, do you want me to see your feet?
Well, you got to kind of see all of me.
Okay.
And it's okay if we don't have it perfectly. We don't have like a cord in the way, do we?
No.
Okay. And maybe I need to hold this because maybe our sound is not very good. Okay, so if you're standing up, okay, I want you to try to stand like the sculpture on number 7, the Greek sculpture, okay? So that means you've got one leg forward, okay? Arms to the side, all right? And weight perfectly balanced between the 2 feet. So your weight is even on these 2 feet, okay? Is that what we're doing right now? Is that comfortable? It is not. If it is, you're weird. But it is not the way you would normally stand. So keeping your feet in the same place, I want you to relax and stand naturally, okay? And so here's what happens. You got to focus more on my midsection right now, okay? Relax, make sure that, and stand naturally, and you'll go like this. Okay? Do you see that? So here's again the way that that figure is standing. Here's the natural way to stand. Your hip pops out. You get an S curve in your back. Okay? This is what we call in art something called contrapposto, or contrapposto is the way I learned it in high school. Sorry, Mr. Orm, you didn't pronounce Italian words very well. Contrapposto. And what that is the natural weight shift, the way the body would stand naturally, not this awkward pose that you get from the Egyptian stuff, okay? All right, we can go back. Hopefully you all did that amazingly. All right, sorry. So now I want you to look at we're looking at slide 9. That's a repeat of 7. I guess I could have used slide 9, but maybe it didn't even need to be in there. Go to slide 10. Slide 10, this is a sculpture, a Greek sculpture called the Critios boy. And the Critios boy is the oldest sculpture that has been found. Again, it's a Roman copy, but it's of a very old sculpture. It's the oldest one that we know of that demonstrates this contrapposto, this weight shift, this contrapposto stance, where you notice that left hip is out, okay, because the right leg is forward. The weight is shifted onto that left leg. There's that S curve in the back. Notice how much better the face has gotten and more realistic it's gotten. Those stylized elements are disappearing on that face. This is what we call, okay, this is what we call the beginning of the classical period of Greek art. This particular sculpture, again, would have been made in the very early 5th century BC. So like the beginning part of the 400s. Okay, and we're counting down backwards with BC, of course. So let's look at some more of these classical sculptures. Classical period of Greek art, a lot of times we will say starts at 480 BC. That's when the Greeks defeated the Persians. And then usually they say ends around 323 with the death of Alexander the Great. This is when Athens was at its height during this period, when Athens is producing some of the greatest ideas, art, architecture, drama that the world had ever seen, okay? So you've got that shift. One of the biggest things in this classical period as well, this is like a golden age for Greece, is idealism in art. They're not necessarily, they wouldn't make a sculpture of me, is what I'm saying, because maybe I don't have the ideal human physical form. But what they would do is make an idealized version. And so you're going to see a lot of sculptures of gods and goddesses. You're going to see a lot of sculptures of athletes or soldiers, because these are people that are physically idealistic in their form. Let's look at number 11, which is, by the way, a sculpture that we are going to see in the Naples Archaeological Museum in southern Italy. This is, of course, a Roman copy of a Greek original sculpture. One thing that you lose when it's a marble sculpture versus a bronze is that marble needs some base to it in order to be able to stand up. And so you'll see there's like a little rock or something that his leg is attached to. The original bronze wouldn't have needed that, but that would have been added by the sculptor of the marble piece. Also, another thing that I feel like I should mention is most Greek sculptures were painted, and they were painted very brightly. And that feels weird to us now. In fact, when I see, oh, here's what this sculpture would have looked like in Greek times, I look at him and I'm like, that looks, ugh. It doesn't look great. We're so used to these ancient figures being in these marble, colorless things, but that's not actually how they were originally. The Parthenon, the friezes, the sculptures around the Parthenon were covered with paint originally. Kind of an interesting thought. It's not the way we see it. It's also not the way they're going to do it in the Renaissance, because they're looking at Greek art the way it looks to us today. They're looking at the Roman marble copies, and so they are imitating that. That's why Michelangelo's David, for example, isn't painted, thankfully. Okay. So number 11, this is Doryphorus. That's a spear bearer. It's a very famous and very typical Greek sculpture. You've got that weight shift that's very pronounced. The weight is all on his right leg. It creates that S curve in the back. That's that contrapposto. He's very physically idealistic. He's a good-looking dude, let's face it, okay? Good-looking dude. Number 12 is an actual original Greek bronze. Most of these original Greek bronzes have been found in ancient shipwrecks. Probably a Roman was stealing this. I'm not kidding, that's probably how this happened. A Roman nobleman was probably stealing this from Greece. The ship went down, it was lost, and then it was discovered years later. That's the story of most of the original bronzes that have survived. So here's what it would have looked like in antiquity. Well, the bronze would have. And so you notice you don't need any kind of a base there, but this is most likely Zeus, although I think they often refer to this as Poseidon. I think it's sort of the romanticism of that it was found in the sea. This god must be Poseidon. Well, it's not probably Poseidon, because it doesn't really work with the trident as much as it would make sense with the lightning bolt. So probably Zeus. And then the next one, 13, again, a very idealistic athlete figure. The Olympics were a huge thing for the ancient Greeks, a big deal. And here is your ideal athlete. Again, it's got to have that base on the back because it's a marble copy of a Greek original. But one thing I will say about this, it's not super realistic. And here's what I mean. He looks like to me like he's posing for this more than I believe that he's actually going to throw that discus. Because if he were actually going to throw that discus, he would have an ugly face right now. That concentrated, maybe Michael Jordan tongue hanging out of the mouth. His face would be tensed up in a way that his body is as well. But that's not very pretty. And so remember, classical period of Greek art is going for idealism. So this is how you would want a discus thrower to look. This calm look on his face, like, I know I'm going to win. I got this. That's what you're seeing here. Maybe not realistic. His body is about as perfect as it can be. So it's more like he's posing for, it's like, I think of the old baseball cards, where you had like the player with the bat over his shoulder and he's like, yeah. He's posing for that. That's not really a game. I mean, he's got a bat. I don't know why he has a bat. He's not about to use it. That's like here. He's holding the discus. He's posing, trying to look good. All right. Let's look at some vase painting. Notice here, this classical vase painting, you get into this red figure period, okay, which is going to allow for a lot more definition and realism and depth in these paintings. If you look at 14, 15, and 16 are all the same painting. It's all the same vase painting, okay? So it's just flipped around. And so 16 is probably the best one to look at. It's like upside down, but it's so you can see it. You see the wings, and if you run it back real quick to remember the wings of Pegasus on slide 4, not realistic at all. Ooh, another thing I wanted to point out on 4. Notice how that checked pattern, that the crosses, what do you call that? Crisscross pattern doesn't change at all based on what should be underneath there. It's not the real way that a garment would change its shape because of the body that's underneath it. It's just a straight up pattern. It's like the way I would draw something. But if you go down to slide 16, look at how the fabric, it feels like there's a body underneath that. It's got realistic folds and movements of the draperies. Okay, so we have such a better understanding of how to portray the human form in art. All right, now we're going to move on to my favorite period of Greek art, the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period, I think officially they'll say started in 323 BC, but really it kind of starts more, at least it starts leaning that way around 404 BC. That's when Athens falls to Sparta. So you have this civilization that at its height that's creating great art, and now things have changed for Athens. And so then by the time you get to Alexander the Great, things have really changed because he's technically not a Greek, he's a Macedonian. And so Greece has come under the power of non-Greeks. So their day in the sun, their heyday when they controlled everything is kind of gone. And so they go from this idealistic period in the 5th century, in the 400s, when they were on top of the world, and their art reflects that. Idealism, perfection, we have this perfect society, that's what our art is going to show, to a much more realistic, emotional, dramatic, sometimes harsh movement. They're trying to portray things more the way they really are. I think of it like this. I think of classical art in Greece as being a portrait, where Hellenistic art is an action photo that's trying to capture the moment of the most intense, the moment of the greatest intensity, the moment that might tell the whole story. It's like a great sports photograph, where you capture this moment of drama, okay? That's what we're looking at.
I have a question.
Yes.
So does Hellenistic get its name from Hellenistic?
It does not. It gets its name from Greece itself. Okay, so Greece in Greek is called Hellas. Okay, and so Hellenistic is this period where Greek art starts to spread to other parts of the world because of the conquering of Alexander the Great, who conquers Egypt, who conquers Asia Minor, who conquers Syria, who gets all the way across to possibly as far as even Afghanistan. He gets into modern day Iran, even like all that area. So the influence of Greek art moves a great distance, and so that's where this Hellenistic comes from. It can be kind of confusing because Hellenic means just Greek, but Hellenistic means this period of Hellenic art, if that makes sense. Thank you for the question. I should have explained that, and I intended to, but kudos to Rachel for asking a great question. All right, here we go. So this is the 4th period of Greek art. Again, after Athens lost to Sparta, this starts to happen. By the time we get to the Alexander the Great, it's really in full swing. And so we're going to see a totally different type of art. First one I want to tell you about is a story from the Trojan War, okay, which was ancient even to the ancient Greeks, because the Trojan War happened maybe around 1200 BC, and we're in like the 300s BC, 200s BC for this Hellenistic period, we're looking at about 323 BC to about 30 BC. 30 BC is when the once Greek world, even Egypt, everything has been conquered by the Romans pretty much. So there's really no, Greece has really lost its identity by then. And so then we kind of consider that the end of Greek art in a sense, because Rome has totally taken over. So, yeah, the Trojan War was 1,000 years ago even for them. So it was a long time ago for them. But it was, celebrated in the works by Homer, and so they knew those stories. And one of the stories from the Trojan War is the Trojan horse, of course. And this is how the Greeks finally get into Troy. They pretend that they leave, and they leave this offering, the Trojan horse, but Odysseus and some of his men are hiding inside the horse. Well, before the Trojans aren't stupid, and so they have this big debate. They're like, yay, the Greeks have left. Oh, there's this offering, but was this left by the gods? Is this some kind of a trick? And so this big debate goes on as to what do we do with this horse? If we don't take it inside the city, maybe we offend the gods that brought us this victory and it all backfires. If we do take it inside the city and it's a trick, then maybe this is a really bad thing. So they're trying to figure out what to do. And in the midst of this, you have this man by the name of Laocoon, who was a kind of an important figure, you might say, in ancient Troy. And he says, this thing's bad. He's like, do not mess with this. If we take this in the city, we're all going to die. And so he's saying this, and he's starting to become pretty convincing. Well, Poseidon, the god of the sea, is strongly on the side of the Greeks in this war. And so Poseidon decides that he's going to shut Laocoon up. So he sends sea serpents to grab Laocoon. They grab Laocoon and his two sons and drag them into the sea to their deaths. Okay? This is a signal, they interpret this wrongly, let's say. The Trojans are then like, we better take this in the city. We don't want to get dragged into the sea either. So this is part of the reason why they make the big mistake and they take the Trojan horse into the city. Well, the Hellenistic sculptor, okay, who created this sculpture of Laocoon is going to try to capture a moment of great emotion, of great movement, of great fear, that kind of tells the whole story. So if you scroll down on slides 17 and 18, you're going to see one of the greatest sculptures ever made. This is the sculpture of Laocoon. This is, again, a Greek copy of a bronze original. That's why you have that base there to help hold it up. There's some creativity here in this. If you notice on the far right-hand side of it, that the drapery is being used as part of the base, and it's a little deceptive. That's pretty well done.
There's a question.
Oh, what's the question?
So Angela wants to know how long the men were in the Trojan horse.
I don't know, like overnight or something. I don't remember exactly, but I do know, well, there was a big party that went on. They celebrated, and when things were quiet, Odysseus and his men came out and opened the gates of the city, and the Greeks had sailed their ships back and go in, and that's it for Troy after a 10-year effort to get into the city. Thank you for the question. What does that mean?
You're 45 minutes in.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this Laocoon sculpture, notice the facial expressions, the movement, you've got the serpent biting them, the writhing, the pain, the fear in the eyes of these boys, these sons of Laocoon and of Laocoon himself. This is an amazing sculpture, and it is in the Vatican Museums in Rome. It is a beautiful, beautiful sculpture, and the best example, I think, of Hellenistic art, one that you don't want to miss. Let's move on a bit. Here's a famous one. This one's actually in the Louvre. This is the Nike of Samothrace. This is a weird one, too, because we're so used to this sculpture. Excuse me, Nike is victory, by the way. We're so used to this sculpture with no head and no arms that I feel like it almost looks better without them. Like, imagine if the head and the arms were there. Would it distract from what we're used to with this sculpture? I kind of feel that way. It's sort of like the fact that they used to paint these, and now that the paint's gone, it's improved it in an interesting way. But this is, again, motion, emotion, not idealism. If we go back to Laocoon in 17 and 18, there's nothing idealistic and wonderful and perfect about getting dragged into the sea by a sea serpent. This is not the highlight of your life. That's what we're trying to get here. Because things had gotten real for the Greeks. Things weren't so cheery and wonderful anymore. Golden Age was over. They're not going to portray things the way you wish they were. You're going to portray things, hey, life kind of sucks sometimes, and this is what our art is going to show. And you see this even more coming up 20, 21, and in 21 you see there's a focus in on the face. This is the Dying Gaul. This is in the Capitoline Museums in Rome. Again, a Roman copy of a Greek original. This is a person dying. He's been stabbed, you can see there in the chest, in the ribs. He's about to go down, and there's pain on his face. His arm is about to give way. This is the end of his life. This is not a great moment, but this is what real life is like. This is what battle does. It's not the spear bearer, the Dory Forest that we saw before in the classical age, where he's standing there posing, oh, war's great. No, war can be terrible, and people die, and it's painful. We go down to 22. What a powerful sculpture this is. I mean, you would never see an old, saggy woman going to the market with her wrinkles and her hunched over limp. But in the you wouldn't see that in the classical era, but in the Hellenistic era, you see it for sure. And she's struggling to carry her groceries back from the market. And her face, she looks like she's dehydrated. She's got this staring look, this, when I, go up one flight of stairs, I feel that. This is what we're talking about. 23, this is a boxer. Again, this is not the discus thrower athlete. This is a boxer who looks like he just lost. He looks like maybe he's over the hill. Look, he's got some love handles going there. He's strong. Maybe in his prime he was a top boxer, and maybe he doesn't know how to do anything else. And so he's still fighting in his advancing years here. He's a little bit saggy in some places. And the look on his face is one of a bit of confusion. Maybe he was knocked out. His face looks puffy, like he's been beaten up pretty good. You would never see this in the idealistic classical period, but in the Hellenistic art, you get these powerful emotions. The next one that you see on 24 and 25 is one that is in the Naples Archaeological Museum. This is the Farnese Bull. This is a whole story from mythology. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but you can see the emotion, the movement, the violence of the killing of this bull. It is an intense moment, and it is portrayed powerfully. This is a huge sculpture, by the way, something to definitely see. Okay, it's called the Farnese Bull, Naples Archaeological Museum. Let's move on to Greek architecture. Slide 26. Okay, the most simple way to create an opening, it's the way that my house was built. It's based on this post and lintel system, where you have posts on the side, you have a lintel across the top. That's what bears the weight. This is what you see primarily in Greek architecture. Now these posts, they decorate them up in 27. On the far left there, that's the Doric style. That's the earliest style of Greek architecture. And then in the middle is the Ionic period. And then on the far right is the Corinthian style, which is very fancy and was very much favored by the Romans.
I did remember that.
Good job from school. The Corinthian style has those acanthus leaves, and the Romans loved the Corinthian style. They really did. Let's take a look at some examples. So there's the Parthenon in 28 and 29, and really 30 and 31 and 32 and 33 as well, and sort of in 34 and 5. The Parthenon, as you can see, is in the Doric style. Now the Parthenon is kind of sad because back in the 1600s, it was controlled by the Turks, and the Turks were storing gunpowder inside the Parthenon, and they're at war. This is the Ottoman Empire at war with Venice, and the Venetians target the Parthenon and hit it perfectly because of the gunpowder that's stored in there. The Turks are up on the hill that the Parthenon sits on, and yeah, it blows it up pretty good. The Parthenon was in pretty decent shape before this happened in the early 1600s, and after this, not so much. And that's why they have done a lot of work recently to do some restoration. You see that on 32 as they were doing restoration work. I can't remember the exact years. I think this was about 2008 that they kind of finished up most of these restorations. That's what you see in 32 and 33. And 34, if you want to see what the Parthenon looked like once, you can go to Nashville, Tennessee, where there is a replica of the Parthenon, for real, that you can go and see. Kind of cool. Anyway, And then down there on 35, that is one of the friezes from the Parthenon. So this would have been up in the, I believe, in the pediment area. That's the triangular area that you see at the top kind of there of the Parthenon. There's one on each side of the building. This was one of some of the pieces from that frieze. These are part of what's known as the Elgin marbles that were taken by the British back in the 1800s. And they are now in the British Museum, and it's still very controversial because the Greeks would like these back, and the Brits are like, we like them. So we'll see. There's been a lot of friction for many years between Greece and Britain over these Parthenon friezes, and we got to see them in the British Museum, so that was pretty cool. So I guess I'm glad they're in Britain. Okay. Next, 36. So this is a place that we are going to go to in Italy. This is Paestum. Has some of the most intact Greek sculptures you're ever going to find. If you've ever seen some of like movies like Clash of the Titans and Jason and the Argonauts from the olden days, not the newer Clash of the Titans, the old Clash of the Titans, with Harry Hamlin of L.A. Law. You know what I'm talking about. A lot of those scenes where they're using a Greek temple, they will film here, because first of all, you're not too far from a major motion picture studio in Rome. This is in southern Italy, south of Naples. But also, they're so intact, especially the sort of centerpiece one there, which you'll see. So there, 37 and 38 are the two of the temples, both Doric style, a little bit older ones, and then the newest of them is this one here that was still built 2,500 years ago. This central temple, which is it's like a little bit smaller version of the Parthenon. You'll notice 6 columns across the front instead of 8. That's a picture of me on 40 standing there back in like 1994, looking good. It's an amazing site. Paestum, definitely, if you go to southern Italy, you're going to places maybe like the Amalfi Coast and Pompeii and Naples, venture down to Paestum. It's an incredible site. There are a lot of Roman ruins as well. So this is an ancient Greek settlement from about 600, 500 BC-ish is when they first settled this. And then you had some Roman structures that were built there later. There's some pictures I took there, 41, 42, 43 in the evening. They light up the temples. It looks really cool. Anyway, definitely worth seeing. How we doing? All right. I need some water. A lot of talking. Hopefully you got some loud gulping on that microphone. You're welcome. All right, let's get into some Roman stuff. The Romans, I wouldn't say were great artists necessarily. I mean, a lot of their frescoes, their paintings, like that you'll find in places like Pompeii or from Pompeii that are in the Naples Archaeological Museum, are quite beautiful. But they don't have the sort of grand paintings that we think of later with periods like the Renaissance. But they do have some great paintings. Sculpture-wise, they mostly just copy the Greeks, except for things like busts. There are so many Roman busts, and they're very realistic, which is cool, because you really get a sense of what Roman emperors like Caracalla really looked like from these busts, or what Julius Caesar really looked like. And so that's kind of cool. Pompey the Great, these busts, you get a great sense of that. But the Romans really, when it comes to their achievements, when we look at a more artistic field, it has to do with their engineering and their architecture more than anything else. And their road system was amazing, and parts of these roads are still there today. Like, they've lasted that long, the famous Appian Way. And they are going to change things up, if you look at slide 45, because of the use of the arch. So the arch is different from the post and lintel, and the arch can hold a far greater amount of weight, because the weight, instead of being focused right at the middle of that beam, of that lintel that goes across the top, or if you put too much weight on it, it's going to snap. The arch distributes the weight evenly across the stones of the arch, and then into the columns, and then into the ground. The picture that you see there on 45 on the right of that archway, that entryway, that's from the Colosseum. The Colosseum isn't possible without arches. The aqueducts, the famous Roman aqueducts, are not possible without arches. And this is why these things are still standing today. So if you look at the Colosseum, one of the interesting things you'll see, I don't know how well you can see this, but the The bottom level of the Colosseum, maybe in some other pictures coming up, or you can look them up on your own. Yeah, you can't see them very well in my pictures. I failed. But if you look closely, maybe you can. The bottom level has Doric columns. The middle level has Ionic columns, and the top level has Corinthian columns. This is an homage to the three Greek styles of architecture. You see this a lot in Renaissance architecture as well, where they'll do those different columns as they work up on the different levels. So the Colosseum, an incredible structure. One of the things that you'll notice when you go to the Colosseum, you notice all the holes. Like if you look at slide 49, see all those holes in there? And you notice how it's the multiple levels, but for part of the Colosseum, only the inside level is still there, the inside section of these layers of the Colosseum. But anyway, the holes, the Colosseum has no mortar, okay? You've got stones, and you've got some concrete in it as well. The main concrete is in the underground. What's the word I'm looking for? The foundation that is underground that you don't see, that is made of concrete, because the Romans were brilliant at concrete, and the Colosseum would not be possible without that concrete. The Roman concrete is better than modern concrete. Like, I know that's crazy to think, but it is. It is superior to modern concrete. Modern concrete, I mean, I walk around my neighborhood. It's only been here a little over 20 years. Some of the sidewalks, the concrete is crumbling away already. 20 years. If you maintain really high quality concrete in the modern world, maintain it very well, you might get 100 years out of it. Okay, you might. There are structures in ancient Rome that were built 2,000 years ago that are still intact. That concrete is still going strong. And there have been a lot of studies done about it, and they don't fully understand why it's so good, which is so interesting. But the Romans, some of it they think has to do with the temperature at which it is mixed, or all kinds of other theories about what makes this Roman concrete so superior to modern concrete. But anyway, but the holes, I was talking about the holes and then I got off track. The holes that you see there in the Colosseum, so there's no mortar, and so to hold the stones together, and this was hidden. You wouldn't have seen this at the time because there was the travertine marble that was covering it. You have these metal clamps or joints that held the Colosseum stones together. Well, in the years after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Colosseum basically became a really convenient and easy quarry. A quarry for metal. Here's some cheap, free metal that I can find. I just pull it off the Colosseum. Oh, and here's some stones I can use to build another building. And so some of the other buildings of Rome are built out of pieces of the Colosseum. The metal is used for all kinds of different things. Well, you pull the metal joints out, big surprise, if an earthquake hits, Colosseum's not stable anymore. And this is why parts of the Colosseum have fell. It's kind of a weird and interesting thing, though, when you look at the Colosseum. Like if you go back to slide 46, and you can see that left side there is mostly intact, but the right side, not so much. Those layers have long since fallen and been taken and used for other things. It's been stabilized, you can see at the top of that right side with bricks. And the nice thing about the use of the bricks is you can easily distinguish the supports. Mostly were done in the 1800s that helped to hold the Colosseum up today. And you can distinguish that from the original ancient pieces. But there is something interesting about it. It almost looks cooler today that it's not fully intact. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but that's the way we're used to seeing it. Did you have something?
You have a question from Rachel. She wants to know, what is their concrete made out of?
Well, there's some volcanic ash that's used, and there's some little pieces in there that they think, when it's heated, created some extra strength. The tensile strength is not as great as modern concrete, but overall it's way more functional. And of course today we reinforce concrete with steel and all of that to build things like skyscrapers. But the concrete itself, even on a skyscraper, is not of the same quality. So anyway, I don't know if that answered it. Now I don't have time to give more of an explanation of that. But and again, we don't fully understand what makes it so much better. And the one thing the Romans were really creative with, especially in the Pantheon, if you go down to the Pantheon, that's starting on slide 52, is that the concrete at the base of the Pantheon which is super thick, but it has to get thinner as it goes up, or else it would be too heavy. And in the dome, it's even thinner, the concrete. But it also it's kind of airier as well. Like they changed the materials, the aggregate that they used on the higher levels. And like this baffles engineers today because they feel like it should not still be intact, because in a sense you've not only thinned it, but you've weakened it, and yet it's still... That's what's incredible about the Pantheon. What makes the Pantheon to me such an amazing structure is that it is an ancient Roman structure that is fully intact today. And it's cool from the outside, but it's even better from the inside, or cooler, I should say, because it is nice and cool in there on a hot summer day. It drops like 20 degrees. So you can cool off in the Pantheon after you wait in the hot line outside. But, so you have this amazing structure. Well, and here's the other thing too. So it's got that Greek facade, but then the rest of it is an arch. And all an arch is a dome that's just spun 360 degrees. That's what a dome is an arch spun 360 degrees. A vault is an arch that is extended, like you see at the Colosseum. And then you have green vaults in like the cathedrals of Europe, where you have one vault that intersects another, and that creates that sort of X pattern that you'll see up on the ceiling of those. These are all great and brilliant supports for these structures. The arch can just hold so much more weight, and so the dome can too. So like the roof of the Parthenon would have been made of wood. You can't make a stone roof over a structure like that. It's too heavy, and it would fall apart, and you'd bust all the lintels. But with an arch, you can create that great interior space. So like a lot of people say that Greek architecture is an architecture of form. It's meant to be beautiful from the outside. Roman architecture is more architecture of space. It's meant to create useful, beautiful, and large interior space. And that's definitely what you see, even with the Colosseum. Yeah, it looks nice from the outside, but it's the interior that matters. And with the Pantheon in Rome, it is especially that way. So you can kind of peruse these pictures here. 55 gives you an overhead view of the Pantheon. It's interesting because when you look at it like back on like 52 and 53, you don't realize how tall this building is, because you can't get back far enough to get that perspective because you run into a building behind you. But if you scroll down to 57, you can see that the top of the dome is more than twice the height of the top of the pediment. That's that triangular area. And if you look at this too on 57, it's kind of funny too, because they started building it and they ordered these columns, and I can't remember where they came from, but they came in shorter than they were supposed to be, so they had to lower the pediment from where it originally was. That's why you see that weird triangle above the main triangular pediment area, above the columns. It's kind of funny, but it's way taller than you think it is when you're standing in front of it, because of your perspective. All right, the inside. So some different photos inside. It is beautiful inside. Corinthian columns are used, which is very typical. The Romans love Corinthian columns, and it creates so much space. And there's no photo that really does it justice. I tried to put some in here that are pretty good. 62, by the way, is a photo I took in 1995 when I was in Rome. They were doing some restoration work on the Pantheon at that time on the inside, and they were cleaning it off. And what was cool is they cleaned off one little section you see there. And you can see all the water stains, because this oculus in the middle, that eye in the middle, provides all the light that the Pantheon needs. There's no other light in there. But it also, when it rains, it gathers on the floor. But they have it set up so that it drains. It's pretty cool. You'll see that if you go to the Pantheon, how it's set up for drainage. But anyway, you see that that clean spot, and then they had scaffolding up on another section where they were cleaning the rest of it, but they left that one little spot, so they're like, hey, this is what it's going to look like in the future. Well, I get to go see it in the future when it's all cleaned up, and so I'm excited about that. And that's what you see in photo number 63 is the cleaned up version. This is a famous painting on slide 64 of the interior of the Pantheon. This is from a couple hundred years ago, like the 1700s, if I remember right. I think this painting was done. And that gives a better sense than most photographs, except modern photography allows us to do pretty cool things like 65. But there's really, and you can see how clean the inside of the dome is. And those are coffers that you see in that dome, and it's so typical. You see this in Thomas Jefferson's architecture. This use of the coffer, which not only beautifies the interior of the dome, but also reduces the weight further. That helps it to, 2,000 years later, it's still standing. Okay, and there's me getting ice cream at this great place near the Pantheon. And I will admit that student that messaged me on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, he was also wondering where was that ice cream shop that you talked about. It's like 2 blocks away from the Pantheon. It's just north of it. It's amazing. And I don't know if it still is, but in the 1990s, it was amazing. You could get these giant ice cream cones that was so fun to walk around Rome because people looked at you like you were insane eating one of those. All right, here's a Roman aqueduct, and what's amazing about this is the Romans were so into fresh water. That was a big deal. That was part of how they were able to build big cities. And the understanding of engineering to be able over, hundreds of miles sometimes to have that most gentle grade so that the water gets from one end to the other, and to build it that way and to have the understanding of making this aqueduct have that slight, gentle grade over such a great distance is quite incredible. Okay. Let's now move into the Middle Ages. Things kind of go downhill in the Middle Ages when it comes to art in most senses. I mean, the cathedrals of the Middle Ages are beautiful. But the visual arts, things like painting and sculpture, it's a big step back from classical times, okay? And so when I say classical, by the way, for the people of the Renaissance period, classical meant anything from Greece and Rome. Basically, ancient Greek and Roman stuff they referred to as classical, okay? So let's look at 68 is a medieval painting, and you can see it's almost like we've gone back to the early Archaic period of ancient Greece as far as the ability to have depth and space and realism, and objects being correctly sized. There's like a building down at the middle bottom of this painting that is like smaller than the people, that the overemphasized halos, that's another thing you see in this on 68. 69 is a relief sculpture. This is the Annunciation. So this is the angel Gabriel on the right announcing to Mary that she's going to give birth to Jesus. And it almost looks like they're doing like a dance move here. The feet are like sticking out in different ways on Gabriel there. There is some decent effort to show that there are bodies underneath those draperies. That's kind of good, but the proportions are all weird in this. And then number 70, this is from Chartres Cathedral in France. Chartres. Anyway, this is from one of the portals. And again, we've lost our effort at making the body look the way it actually looks. And it's going to change with the Renaissance. I saw an amused look on your face.
So Rachel said, ugly old baby art. Babies look like old men.
All right, slide 71. Focus on this one for me. This is a painting by Cimabue. He is an Italian. This was made in the year 1286. So we're getting nearish to the end of the Middle Ages. Okay, Middle Ages, I don't know, maybe around 1400-ish, we would say the medieval period is over. There's some overlap maybe. The Renaissance starts in probably the 1300s at some point. So anyway, we're at the end of the Middle Ages. And notice, things have improved a bit. We've got some overlap, but most of the overlap of the figures is just by stacking them higher. Like, if these people are supposed to be standing on the same level, the ones on the sides, these angels, they're not. But they do at least kind of feel like they're behind each other. Mary and Jesus looks like a little man, which is very typical in medieval art because there was this feeling that making him look like a baby made him look weak. And so he almost always looks like a little man, which is awkward. Not realistic for sure. And there's some attempt at trying to create depth, but it's wrong. And Mary's lap doesn't seem like a real lap. I expect Jesus to be falling. Okay, because there really isn't the sense of a real knee there and a real leg to hold him up, okay? Now, I want to emphasize this because Cimabue's student was a man by the name of Giotto. Oh, and by the way, this painting here of Cimabue you can find in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, which we are going to. So Cimabue's student was a man named Giotto, and about 20 years later, we believe around 1306, he painted what some consider to be the first Renaissance painting. He's a student of Cimabue, he takes the same subject, and you see those two side by side in 72. And the improvement, no offense to Cimabue, but the improvement from Cimabue to Giotto in 20 years is pretty astounding. The figures overlap each other the way they really would if you were looking at a group of people, okay? A little higher, okay? But actually in front of each other. Not as much like a little man. He's got a little baby fat. Mary has a real lap with real knees. There's some attempt at an architectural feature there that creates depth. Now, they haven't figured out the true mathematics behind creating what we call linear perspective, where you have this sense of actual depth in a painting, but Giotto's getting there. So is Giotto a Renaissance painter? He's either like the very end of the Middle Ages or the beginning of the Renaissance. It depends on how you look at it. So what does the word Renaissance mean? It means rebirth, which is the rebirth of classical. It's the rebirth of the classical period. They're bringing back Greek and Roman art, okay? And it's a period where they really see themselves in a very idealistic way. So it's mostly going to look like classical Greek art versus Hellenistic Greek art, okay? That's important to note. 73 is another great painting by Giotto. I love the like angels in the background that are weeping at the death of Jesus. They almost look like they're on fire. I don't know if he did that on purpose, but there's true lamentation. There's true sadness. It's not quite the emotion that you'd see in a Hellenistic type painting, or a Hellenistic, well, there aren't Hellenistic type paintings, but you get what I'm saying. And this will all make sense in a bit. 74, slide 74, that is Filippo Brunelleschi. He's the guy, he's a hugely important figure in the history of art and architecture in Florence. He's the guy that figures out the mathematics behind linear perspective. What's interesting is we don't have any of his paintings that illustrate this. It's from the writings of other artists giving credit to him and other historical documents that we know he's the guy that figured this out. He very famously did this in an experiment with, you see 75 there. That's the Florence Baptistry. It's on the right across from the Florence Cathedral. So the front doors of the Florence Cathedral, if you're looking out them, you would see this baptistry. And he famously did this painting of the baptistry from the steps of the Florence Cathedral. And then he put that painting up, and he had people look through a hole, and there was a mirror that would show the actual baptistry behind, and he would put the mirror as they were looking through, and they would see the reflection of the baptistry, and then he'd move the mirror, and they'd see the painting, and it looked exactly the same. And it blew people away, this experiment. They're like, oh my gosh, you figured this out. And he did. He figured out the mathematics to be able to create a painting that accurately represents the space that you're seeing and how it looks to the human eye. And it is very well illustrated in an early perspective painting, number 76, by a man named Perugino. This is, I believe this is in the Sistine Chapel. Below all of Michelangelo stuff, you got a bunch of paintings around the Sistine Chapel, and I'm pretty sure this is one of them. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm remembering wrongly, but I think that that's the case. And you'll notice here, if you go down to slide 77, it shows those perspective lines. You've got a very simple perspective that you can see on the ground. The depth also, mathematically, the height of the figures in that second level is accurate for what it should be, the height of the buildings. You've got the horizon line and then that vanishing point where all those red lines come to. This is how Brunelleschi used mathematics, and a lot of that came from the newer understanding of map making that he translated into this. So this age of exploration that was getting started at the time of his life factored into this. It's all pretty interesting. Anyway, so that's linear perspective that completely changes painting. Brunelleschi, if that's all he did, it would be important, but he's the guy that finally figured out how to put the dome on the Florence Cathedral. So they started building the cathedral years before, and they didn't know how they were going to put the dome on top, but they hoped that by the time they got the rest of it done, there'd be someone who would come along and figure it out, and someone did. That was Brunelleschi. And when he went, this is a legendary story. We don't know if this really happened or not, but I hope it did because it's great. When he went to the when he went to try to get the job, okay? And he's interviewing essentially with this panel. He says, well, the way to do this is you've got to be able to make an egg stand up. And by stand up, the pointy part of the egg would be up and that rounder part here. So not on its side the way that it would normally be, but you've got to get an egg to stand up on the table. And so he's got these eggs and they're trying to do it. And he's like, it's really simple. All you got to do is break the ass of the egg. And he pops it and it stands up on the table. Well, they were kind of offended by this, but he was trying to illustrate the point. He was going to do this shell within a shell construction to make this dome work. And this dome changes everything. There hadn't been a dome of this size built anywhere in the world really since the Pantheon. You've got Hagia Sophia in what is now Istanbul. So there was some understanding of that more in the East. But as far as in Europe, like or Italy, anything like this. It's a huge dome, and you can see it towers above the city. You can see in 80, it's got some sketches about what that looks like, the shell within a shell construction. And so I don't know if the egg story is true or not, but I like it. And it's so beautiful. And picture number 82, I took that picture back in 1995, thank you, from the bell tower of the Florence Cathedral, looking off at Florence. I mean, professional photography, basically. I could have done that based on this photo. All right, you have some beautiful palaces, but they're very, in the Renaissance period, they're very clean, different from what you would see if you were thinking more Hellenistically. It's that idea of perfection, very clean lines, and it's also designed for city dwelling, so it's a different time. So it's not going to be Greek temples. It's going to be what can you do that is inspired by the Greeks and the Romans, but that works in a city. And so you'll see these palazzo, which is palace in Italian. You'll see those everywhere. That's the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, the famous Medici family that controlled Florence for a long, long time and really are a big reason why the Renaissance even happens. That was one of their palaces you see there. If you go down to 84, this is the Palazzo Farnese in Rome from the Renaissance period. Very clean. You'll see a rebirth of this, interestingly, because it kind of goes in cycles. You've got this classical idealistic period that then transfers into the Hellenistic, which is a reaction to that. And then as you move along to the Renaissance, you've got, again, this very classical idealistic period that then will move into the Baroque, which is going to be a reaction to that. Violence, movement, emotion. And then that will move into the neoclassical period, which is the period when, the United States of America is coming to be. And this is why our government buildings look like this, like Renaissance and Greek classical type architecture. And then that's going to move into, a more emotional period in the Romantic period. So there's this kind of, pattern that it follows in art. Anyway, need more water. 85 through 85 through 89. This is the Capitoline Hill in Rome. This was designed by Michelangelo. So here's some more of that Renaissance architecture. This was built on the old hill where it's called the Capitol. Basically, you can see in number 87, you can see the Roman Forum behind. It's like right in the heart of Rome. It's pretty cool. And there's an amazing museum there as well inside the two side buildings. And anyway, some cool pictures of that. All right, speaking of Michelangelo, there's Michelangelo in slide number 90. That's a self-portrait. Michelangelo, one of the greatest artists, period, ever. This is a man who was a brilliant sculptor, which I think it was his best, a brilliant painter, and a brilliant architect. Three very different mediums, and he mastered them all and is one of the greatest of all time in all three of those mediums. 91 is his sculpture of the Pietà, which is in St. Peter's in Rome. This is Christ, the dead Christ on the lap of his mother Mary. This is an incredible work. It's carved out of marble. So why so much marble in the Renaissance? Well, because that's what they saw. They saw those Roman copies in marble of the Greek originals. And so that's what they're inspired by and basing their artwork on. So this is probably my favorite sculpture ever made. It's unbelievable to see in person the difference between Christ's body and the rougher fabric that Mary's wearing, and then the more delicate fabric of her headdress, and then her young face, which is idealistic. She's not portrayed as someone who should be around 50 years old at the time Christ dies. Instead, she's portrayed back the way she would have looked at the time of Christ's birth as far as her young face is. Although, if we're talking about Mrs. Lewis, she's almost 50, and she looks just as good as she did 30 years before, no question. All right, some other works. On 92, this is one that we're going to see in the Galleria dell'Accademia in Florence. These are Michelangelo's unfinished sculptures. They're often referred to as the prisoners, or they used to call them the slaves, but I think prisoners is probably a better way to phrase this. And this is what makes Michelangelo so interesting and unique, is that he did not carve a sculpture the way most people would, which is you just kind of work your way around, chip a little off here, walk to the other side, chip a little off there. He would just start at the front and work his way through. He always said that the sculpture was living in the stone. He just had to liberate it. He could picture it so perfectly in that stone that he would just sculpt in a way. Like, it's incredible to me that anyone can make a sculpture out of marble anyway. Like, it blows my mind. But to do it the way he did is just a totally more amazing thing. It's really incredible. And what's cool about these unfinished sculptures is you can kind of see his process taking shape. And they call them the prisoners because it's like these figures are imprisoned in the stone and they're fighting their way out. I don't know. There's several of these, and they're right in the hall. So there's this long hallway, and at the end of it is Michelangelo's David. And you see these prisoner sculptures along the way as you're working your way down towards David. It's pretty cool. All right, David. One of the greatest sculptures ever made. It is absolutely incredible, and part of what makes it so incredible, and part of what makes it in person just something unbelievable, is they have it in a great setting, first of all, in this domed room at the end of this long hallway. But you have to realize the sculpture is 17 feet tall. And it's also sitting on a base that's about 5 feet tall. And it's hard to, in a photograph, even grasp how huge this thing is. And it makes you realize, so when he was carving it, he was up and down these big ladders constantly. I don't know how you do it. It was done from a piece of marble that was damaged, in a sense that another sculptor had started working on it and taken a big chunk off. And this is part of the reason why Michelangelo's leg is positioned the way it is, because he had to account for this section of the marble that had been carved off. Anyway, so you've got this powerful figure that was actually the commission, and part of why it was such a huge stone was it was supposed to be up on top of a building, actually. And when it was done, the Florentines are like, we can't put this on a building. And so they put it in the middle of the town square, essentially. And there's a replica of it there today. It was out there in the elements for a long time, but a couple hundred years ago, they brought it inside because it was getting damaged by the wind and the rain. And anyway, so that's part of why you notice that the head is oversized. Well, that's because if you were looking at it from the ground up on top of a building, you could still see it well. The hands are oversized so that you could get a better sense of those hands from down on the ground. It's kind of interesting. And it's also interesting that he put this much care into the face that pretty much no one he thought was ever even going to see. That he carved the face and the hair and the hands, if you look at 94, with that kind of detail, assuming no one was going to really see this sculpture up close ever anyway. And it's just it's a tribute to his excellence. It's so unbelievable. And the look on the face, this pent-up energy, this determination, with a little bit of fear mixed in too. I mean, this is him staring down the giant Goliath before he's about to throw the stone. Hurl that stone with that sling. And that's the moment that's captured here. It's amazing. All right, next, 95 is another great sculpture. This one is very much inspired by ancient Greek sculptures of gods. This is Moses. He looks like a Greek god. He's got the horns. This is a misinterpretation of a Bible passage, but you almost always see Moses with horns, and that's like a distinguishing feature so that you know it's Moses. But the power, I mean, he looks like he could be Poseidon. But the beard, the fabric, all of that, it's just an incredible sculpture. All right, painting. 96 there, that's the Sistine Chapel. It ain't much from the outside, but when you get inside, it's unbelievable. And you can see there, 97, that's looking up at the ceiling. You've got these scenes from the book of Genesis. that work their way across. All of the things that look like architectural features are all paint. And he painted this on a curved ceiling, which if you look at it there, it looks like it's maybe not. It's so many optical illusions and brilliant things, and it's something you have to see in person to really fully grasp. The most famous section of that, of course, is the creation of Adam. You see God, and you see the drapery behind God with his entourage behind him, which I love that. It looks like a brain, and this was probably intentional. I guess we don't know that for sure, but it almost has to be. Brain stem there in the back on the far right. And Michelangelo cut up dead bodies to try to understand the human anatomy to be able to paint and sculpt it more effectively. And this is some of the evidence of that, I guess. But I love the entourage. I think it's awesome. And the power, if you zoom in on the hands, the power of God's hand and the limp, weak human hand as he's breathing life, in effect, into Adam, it's just really, really a great sculpture. Years later, he came back and did this Last Judgment wall that you see in 99. And this is an older, grumpier Michelangelo with a less optimistic view of humanity. As you see all these people going to hell, you see Michelangelo's self-portrait there. You see that skin that's hanging almost right in the middle of this painting. This is also in the Sistine Chapel, by the way. And that's a self-portrait of Michelangelo as St. Bartholomew. That's St. Bartholomew's skin hanging there. He was supposedly flayed alive. And then it also, at the top, you see it almost looks like eyes at the top. It's kind of Darth Vader's mask there, in a sense. It's kind of interesting. I guess he knew about Darth Vader. I don't know. And you got all these people going to hell down here, demons and stuff. What's interesting, if you go down to slide 100, that's what it looked like 40 years ago if you went. It was covered from all the incense and other things that had burned in there. It had really clouded it. The colors were messed up. The bottom was not very well visible. This is true of the ceiling as well. A lot of people wrongly assumed that Michelangelo wasn't much for color in his paintings until they restored it in the 1980s and early 90s, both the ceiling and the Judgment Wall, and it looks totally different now. And so you see a side-by-side of the Judgment Wall of a before and after the restoration, and it's like two different paintings. Michelangelo architecturally not only did that Capitol that we saw, but many other buildings, including St. Peter's. He did the original design of St. Peter's, which included the dome. And there you see outside and inside. And of course, this style of dome, it's based on Brunelleschi, but he takes it in Florence, but he takes it to a new level. And this style of dome, of course, has huge influence in the next swing to classical type art and architecture in the neoclassical period. This is why the U.S. Capitol dome looks the way it does. It is inspired by Michelangelo's dome here at St. Peter's. Okay, the inside is unbelievable. The letters are like 8 feet tall or something like that. Anyway, the size of the interior of St. Peter's is unbelievable. View from up top. Now, Michelangelo originally, it was built over such a long period of time. Michelangelo died long before the building was completed, and so some of his plans were changed. A man named Carlo Maderno did the facade, and he did it not the way Michelangelo wanted to. He did it way more bigger and grander than it was supposed to be. More bigger, I just said. Way bigger and grander than it was supposed to be. You see that in 106. And the problem is it creates a situation sort of like with the Pantheon, where when you're up close to the building, you can't really see the dome anymore, and you can't tell how big it is exactly, how tall it is, because the facade blocks the view. So it's not Michelangelo's original design, but it's still just brilliant. All right, so let's move on to 107. This is a painting by Raphael, which actually is in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and it may be his very best painting of his genre that he did a lot, which was the Madonna and Child, so Mary and the baby Jesus or young Jesus. Here you see them with Jesus' cousin John the Baptist, and it's just a beautiful painting. These frescoes are so... A fresco, by the way, is when you paint on wet plaster, and then that paint seeps into that plaster, and that's why it's called fresco. Fresco means fresh, and it creates very delicate colors, and these pastels, I don't know if I've ever known a painter that created, I guess, more beautiful colors than Raphael. It really does that amazingly. And this painting is a great example of that. Another Madonna and Child painting. And again, Jesus looks like an actual baby in these paintings, which is part of what I love. It's like a real intimate mother-child relationship. not the awkward one that we saw with Cimabue, and even to some extent with Giotto. He was improving, but this is like, it feels more real. 109, it especially does. This is in the Raphael rooms in the Vatican. If you go to the Vatican museums and Sistine Chapel, you can see these rooms as well. And this one here, it's like Jesus is like snuggling up to mom, because it's like we've happened onto this scene and they're looking at you, and Jesus is like shy or nervous because he's a little kid, and all these people are staring at him, and he like snuggles up to his mom for safety. I don't know, I love it. And then of course the famous little cherub angels down at the bottom of that painting that you see in people's bathrooms and stuff.
What's up with all the babies on the curtain behind them in 109?
The babies on the curtain. I don't know what you're talking about.
Behind them in 109. So if you zoom in.
Oh, yeah. I do not know. I think they're probably supposed to be angels back in the distance, like the little cherubs that are down at the bottom. That would be my guess. Either that or they're like the undead attacking. One of the two. My favorite Raphael painting is the School of Athens. This is on 111. I've never seen this in person, although I've been to the Vatican museums twice. And both times, once in 1994, once in 1995, it was covered up by a curtain because they were doing restoration work, and there was just a little like replica about this big in front saying, here, look at this instead. And it's like, well, I can see that anytime I want on my computer, so thank you. So I've never seen the School of Athens in person, but I will in a couple of weeks. Okay, let's review. Classical Greek art, idealistic, this is 112. Perfect form, Hellenistic, motion, emotion, violence, swings back with the Renaissance to David, much more similar to what we saw with the Dory Forest Spear Bearer in 112. And then we get to the Baroque period. The Baroque period is a reaction to the Renaissance. It is going to be much more like the Hellenistic. It's almost like it's a rebirth of the Hellenistic. This is where things really get, to me, crazy and interesting in Italian art, is this Baroque period, because it's wow. And the sculptural genius of the Baroque period is Gian Lorenzo Bernini. That's a self-portrait of him. And here's Bernini's David. So Bernini's David is not like Michelangelo's right before, posing almost. It's the moment that he is slinging that stone. And notice, different from the discus thrower that we saw earlier, his face is concentrated. His body is tensed, yes, but the face is concentrated. Now, it's marble. He's got to have something to support it. And what Bernini does so amazingly is he uses part of the story. If you remember from the biblical story, the king, Saul, had offered him his armor and his weapons to go fight Goliath. And David realizes, now I'm turning that down. I'm trusting God, and I'm trusting my own abilities and what I know. And so he rejects the armor. And so Bernini brilliantly uses the armor as the support, as the base. This, to me, is better than what Michelangelo even did. Michelangelo puts like a little tree stump on the leg of David. Bernini uses part of the story. And this is in the Galleria Borghese, which is the Baroque museum, the best in the world. It's in Rome. And you've got multiple brilliant sculptures by Bernini and paintings by Caravaggio as well, and others. But anyway, so let's take a look at some more angles. If you go to 117, and that's what's so cool is in this museum you can walk around and see the different sides. And you see how it's the drapery that looks light that's connecting to that armor to hold up the sculpture to give it a strong enough base for that heavy marble up on top. 118, notice 119, we've got some great armpit hair. This is some true effort. Oh, and by the way, the face of David is Bernini himself. If you go back to his painting, you might be able to tell that's the same dude. Kind of interesting. All right, so I've wondered, and I've asked myself often, okay, so which is better? And if you look at 120, you've got Bernini's action-packed sculpture, or you've got Michelangelo's static, idealistic sculpture. And when I was in high school, well, and maybe you could put in the chat, which one do you like better? You're so smart, Mrs. Lewis. Which one do you like better, Mrs. Lewis?
Bernini's.
You like Bernini's better. In high school, I felt like Bernini's is way better. This is unfair. It's just because Michelangelo is so famous. Why doesn't Bernini get more fame? Why doesn't everyone know Bernini's David? It's better than Michelangelo's David. And then I saw Michelangelo's David in person, and I changed my mind. And that's slide 121. Okay, Michelangelo's David is 17 feet tall. And the sheer size of that sculpture compared to the little, 6 foot tall-ish Bernini's David, so it's like thrice the height. And I tried to get the scale right there. It's not perfect, but it's close. When you realize just how huge that sculpture is, it just changes it. It's so awe-inspiring just because of the magnitude. The sheer size of it will blow you away. And so, yes, I did feel, looking in photographs, that Bernini's David was superior, but in person, Michelangelo's is so unbelievably gigantic that it just, wow. Anyway, now the Baroque period is a little more holy, and so you're not going to see David's business in Bernini's David. That's, it's a little less Greek and Rome inspired as far as the naughtiness. Okay, anyway, although it is kind of naughty, as you're going to see. 122, another great Bernini sculpture. This one's almost more air than stone. I don't know how he pulled this off. I don't know how he didn't break this while he was trying to do it. This is a story from Greek mythology. Apollo is struck by the arrow of Cupid, and falls in love madly with Daphne, this nymph, and he's chasing her through the forest. And she does not want, she gets the other arrow, you don't want this Apollo guy. And she's running, but she's not as fast as the god Apollo, of course, and he's gaining on her. And so she prays to her father, who's like the god of that forest, and this lesser god, to save her, turns her into a tree. And of course, in true Baroque fashion, movement, emotion, motion, violence, action, he captures the moment that this is happening. So the moment that Apollo reaches her, as Daphne is turning into a tree, it is so cleverly done. If you look at 123, notice her eyes are like rolling back into her head, like she's starting to lose her humanity. And there's surprise as well, like, this is not exactly what I was thinking, Dad. Notice that Apollo reaches around and probably thinks he's going to be touching flesh. Instead, he's getting tree bark for most of his hand. And this, do we get a look at his face? You do a little bit back on 122. He's got this sort of a look starting. Like, what is going on here? Her hair is turning into leaves. It's so amazing. Look at the back. Look at how that drapery connecting to the trunk is what holds Apollo up, because he doesn't have anything really down at his foot that should be able to hold up all the weight of the rest of him. But this drapery that swings around and connects to the trunk that is forming of Daphne. Again, it's a sculpture you got to walk around. It's amazing. All right, the next one. Probably my favorite Bernini sculpture. This is another story from mythology. This is Hades and Persephone. Persephone is the daughter of what's her name? The goddess, Greek goddess of agriculture. It's one of Hades and. Name is like Demeter. Thank you. Sorry. All right. So Demeter. Demeter is the mother of Persephone. She loves this daughter very much. Hades is lonely down in the underworld. He decides he needs to come and abduct her. And so this is the reason we have seasons, because eventually a compromise is reached and she spends half the year in the underworld and half the year with her mother. And so that's why we have winter. This is the story from Greek mythology. Anyway, of course, in Baroque fashion, it's the moment of violence, action, drama, fear that is the abduction. And all three of these sculptures by Bernini that we just looked at are in the Galleria Borghese in Rome. And here it is, 125, 126, 127, 128, 129, 130, 131, 132. Yeah, I put a lot of them in here because I love this sculpture. Those are all the same one. Okay, this is all that sculpture. And this is that violent moment of the abduction. I love, you've got Persephone who's like pushing out, like boom, popping Hades in the head. His beard even flies out. She's trying to get away. Notice it's the same, he used the same model. He must have really liked this particular model, the way that she worked out in his sculptures, because he used her in both of these great sculptures. I don't know who it is. I don't know if we know. I'd have to look that up. I'd like to know, who was this person? Was it someone in his family? Was it? I don't know. I'd like to know. Anyway, so you've got Hades, muscular, rough, and then you've got the soft skin. The difference between them is one of the most amazing things. If you pull around and we get to the close-ups, like 128, his hands versus hers, like this is one solid piece of marble. It's one block of marble. It literally looks like it's two pieces. It is not. If you go to 129 and 130, the way that his hands press into her flesh, it is absolutely astounding to me. And the difference, especially in 130, look at his skin versus her skin. How do you take the same piece of marble and carve it in such a way that it looks like real human skin? It's so crazy the way that it presses in so realistically. This sculpture is brilliant, and I love so much, again, Bernini does this better than Michelangelo. Okay, he has hit on how to bring the story into the base so that it doesn't feel awkward or out of place in order to support the weight of the sculpture. Again, he uses the drapery, which nicely covers Hades' items to make it more church appropriate in the Baroque period. But that attaches to, if you go back up, you'll see it well in 127. It's Cerberus, the three-headed dog of the underworld, that makes up the support of the base of this sculpture. And so he takes something that could logically have been there, this dog, Hades' dog, three-headed dog, and uses that dog to support the sculpture. I love that. And you can see the beautiful Galleria Borghese behind. It's quite an opulent place, very Baroque in its architectural features.
You're at an hour 45.
We're doing pretty well, though, because we're almost done. Okay. Bernini also designed St. Peter's Piazza that you see there, the square, St. Peter's Square in front of the Vatican. You see that there. He also designed some of the things inside St. Peter's. You've got the throne with the sunbeams in 134. 135, the baldacchino. This is like a, it goes over the crypt. And anyway, I'm almost out of water. I gotta stop talking so much. It's very opulent. Even the columns, they swirl and move. This is, again, that Baroque focus on movement. Baroque is like over-decorated. It's like hyper-intense. That's Baroque architecture, just like the sculptures are intense and moving. Another, this is the tomb of Pope Alexander the something, I can't remember, in 136. This is inside St. Peter's as well. You've got like death with like this with this hourglass coming out from under the drapery on 136. It's pretty intense. Piazza Navona, this was built on an old Roman oval racetrack, this plaza, and that's why it's in that shape. And there are three fountains you can see there from that 137 aerial view. Bernini sculpted those. The one in the middle, which you see on 139, is the Fountain of the Four Rivers. Each one represents one of the major rivers of the world, like the Nile, for example. And anyway, a very beautiful fountain. All right, Baroque painting. It gets interesting, okay? Bernini is the painter or the sculptor of the Baroque period. Caravaggio is the painter of the Baroque period in Italy. And he lived an interesting life. He had a lot of issues. He got in a fight at a tennis court. So he was painting for the Pope and living in Rome. Keep in mind, Rome at that time was a political area as well. It was part of the papal state. So the Pope was the king of central Italy, in effect. Anyway, so he gets in a fight over a tennis game. The tennis match, they think that it was related to some wagering that was done. And he gets in an argument and he stabs and kills a guy. And so he has to flee Rome because he's wanted for this murder. And he flees down to Naples. Naples was a different country completely, okay, at this time. It was not Italy as we know it, okay? So he's down in Naples and he's under the protection of the rulers of Naples who are foreign. And, you've got the French and then the Spanish connections, the Bourbons basically, that rule Naples. So he's down there. He does some paintings there as well. He is all about shock value. He's all about it's called tenebrism. Tenebre means like darkness in Italian. And tenebrism is there's this extreme contrast between light and dark in his paintings. He loves to use one or maybe two light sources and create lots of shadow. He does this for dramatic effect. He also places things not the way they're supposed to be. Like if you have Jesus in a painting, he should be right in the middle and the vanishing point should be right on him and everything coming to Jesus. That's not the way Caravaggio is going to do it. He shocks people because he puts biblical scenes in a modern context. So think of it today, Christ was a carpenter. It would be like if you paint Christ wearing jeans and a t-shirt like a carpenter would wear. That's what Caravaggio's doing, but 1600s version. So they're in the clothing of the 1600s instead of what they would have worn 2,000 years ago or 1,600 years before his time when he's doing these scenes, these biblical scenes. It's very interesting. And it may not look shocking to us, but to people then it was. And just the realism. He's trying to say, okay, I want to make this feel as real as possible, so I'm not going to put him in old clothing, I'm going to put him in our clothing. What would this really look like to somebody today if this were happening next door to you or out on the street? This scene from the Bible, whether it's from the Old Testament or whether it's from the life of Jesus, what would that look like? Let's strip down all of that. So it might look fancy because of the clothing, like might look fancy to us, but it's the clothing that people wore at his time, okay? So the first one, this is the calling of St. Matthew 141. Notice Jesus is not in the middle. Jesus is partly covered up by Peter here, which we don't even see Peter's face. Like, this is all wrong because it feels like in the Renaissance it's staged. It's like, when you're doing a play, you always face the audience and you make sure that things aren't being blocked. He's not trying to do that at all. He's like, what would it really look like if Jesus walked into a house and called you to be one of his disciples? What would that look like? Remember, Matthew was a tax collector, and so they're dressed in the banking clothing of the 1600s. Peter over here is dressed in the poor clothing of the Peter and Jesus, and these are working class people, and that's the clothing that you would have worn in the 1600s. Jesus is pointing. Notice it's the same pose. His hand is positioned like the hand in Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, like Adam's hand. It's kind of a cool little homage to Michelangelo. There's some debate as to which one of these is Peter. Is it the bearded guy? Is he pointing at himself? Or are they pointing at the guy who's looking down at the table counting the money? And he's pointing like, you want him? So there's debate. I think it's the guy that's looking down. Most art experts think it's the bearded guy, that he's pointing at himself saying, you want me? But I think he's saying, you want that guy? Anyway, either way, it's an interesting take on this. So he portrays David very differently from the way that Michelangelo does before the battle or the way that Bernini does in the middle of it. Caravaggio wants to shock us. He does it after. And so here's David with, again, weird light source stuff going on. You've got this single light source that's creating all these shadows. This is 142. And then you've got him having just chopped off the head of Goliath. So you see the body lying there on the ground. You see the bloody mark in the forehead where the stone hit. And here he is chopping off the head so that he can show everyone, yeah, I killed this guy. It's just odd. And it's so interesting. All right, go down to 143. There's the story from the Old Testament where Abraham is commanded to sacrifice Isaac. And he he hikes up to the top of this hill. And again, it's this violent moment. Isaac is not excited about the fact that his father is about to kill him. And you see that on his face. And you get the real sense of the violence and the fear and the pain of this moment. And then the angel steps in and grabs Abraham's hand and says, no, 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 use that instead. And you see the ram that was provided in the biblical story. But it's all brought to this real sense. It's not this idealized, perfect, like a Renaissance painting of this would not look like this. It wouldn't have that feel of pain and movement and realism. It would look all idealized and perfect, like it's this wonderful biblical scene, which it is, but Caravaggio makes it real. I find it so impressive. The next one is 144. So St. Peter, according to legend, was condemned to be executed, and he was to be crucified, and he said he didn't feel like he lived up to Jesus or whatever, so he wanted to be crucified differently and crucified upside down. We don't know if that really happened, any of that, but that's what's being portrayed here. And again, you've got that single light source that creates the massive shadows. Like, the focal point of this painting is almost that dude's butt. It's like lighted up in your face, but it's trying to show what it would really be like to raise this cross. Peter is there. He's not enjoying things very much. He's getting old. He's got old man skin that's like sloughing off of his body. It feels almost too real. When we think of these biblical type moments, these religious moments, you want there to be this angelic feel to it, maybe, that like what feels the way it should be, but he makes it feel real. It's almost like that show, right? The Chosen, right? Okay, anyway. The next one is the story on the road to Emmaus. This is after Christ's death, and he has resurrected and appeared to some of his apostles. He's walking along the road to Emmaus with some of his other followers who are discussing with him. They don't recognize him. And they're talking about Jesus and what's happened, and they're talking about their struggles and their pains. These are working class people, again, in working class clothes of the 1600s. And then they ask this man, this stranger, to dine with them. And while they're eating, all of a sudden they have the realization that it's Jesus. And that's the moment that Caravaggio captures here, this moment of surprise. Notice the ripped clothing, the simple clothing of these men. I just love that realism. So the next one, don't look at it yet. If you have already, don't look closely at 146 yet. Okay, I love 146. This is another biblical story. This is life of Jesus. So you've maybe heard the term doubting Thomas. Well, this comes from when Jesus resurrects. The story in the Bible is that he resurrects and he meets with his apostles, but they're not all there. One of his apostles wasn't there that first night for some reason, and that's Thomas. The other apostles tell Thomas what has happened, that Jesus is back, that he's alive, and he's like, he doubts. He's like, I'm not sure if I believe you guys, basically. So the next night he's there, Jesus comes back, and he provides Thomas the same opportunity that he had provided everybody else. The chance to feel the wounds in his hands and in his feet, and the wound in his side that he had from the time of the crucifixion, and is able to know that this is Jesus. All right, so now go down to 146, and you can see this moment playing out. And it's almost too real. Like, the lighting is not great. Thomas has his brow furrowed as he's looking, and Jesus is like grabbing his arm and forcing it into his side, because kind of like you or me, you're like, I don't know if I want to stick my finger in your side, Jesus. He's like, no, you need to. And it's just, it has that real, it takes a biblical scene that's almost magical, right, and brings it down to earth. This is what I love about Caravaggio. Okay. A painter that's very much inspired by Caravaggio is Artemisia Gentileschi. She's really the first woman. She's the first woman that is a member of the Academy in Florence. She has opportunities as a female artist that really you don't have before. I mean, we know there have been great female artists before Gentileschi, but we don't know their names, really. She's the first one that we really know, okay, in history, basically. She She learns art because her father is a great artist. His name is Orazio Gentileschi, and he recognizes her talent and he teaches her. He also gets another artist of the day by the name of Agostino Tassi to teach her as well, and she soon shows more talent than either of them, okay? But Agostino Tassi, he's a creep, okay? And Agostino Tassi rapes Gentileschi. He rapes her when she's about 18. He's about 33 years old. And the sadness of this is at that time, in order to restore her honor, because somehow this is on her, right? Gentileschi's father demands that Tassi marry her in order to restore her honor. And he says he will, and this goes on for a while, and eventually he doesn't. He actually takes him to court over this. She has to testify. She doesn't want to, and so she is actually tortured to be and forced to testify. It's a horrible story. Not surprisingly, she has some issues that come out in her art. And does this make you understand it better now, dear? Because she's looked at these pictures and was like, whoa. The first one, not so much. This is Mary Magdalene. This is according to tradition, this isn't anywhere in the Bible, but according to tradition, she was a sinner, a prostitute who came over to follow Jesus. And this is, it looks very Caravaggio-esque with the lighting, and the single light source, and also the clothing, modern day clothing for that time, rather than ancient clothing. But a very beautiful painting. Okay, the next one is a story from the book of Judges. It's Jael in Sisera. This is a woman who, to save her people, ends up courting and then murdering a Canaanite leader, which saves the people in the book of Judges, okay? And she does this by taking like a, what is the word I'm looking for? She pounds a stake into the side of his head when he's asleep, essentially. Drunk, I think, if I remember right from the story. So slide down to 149, and there you see this happening. It's violent. It's intense. It's real, though, still. It's a moment, it looks very Caravaggio-esque. Now, the next few, don't look at them yet, are another story from the book of Judith, which is in the Catholic Bible. It's not in the Protestant Bible. It'd be considered part of the Apocrypha for non-Catholics, essentially. So anyway, this is the story of Judith and Holofernes. It's a similar story. Judith, who is a widow, in order to save the Jewish people, she woos Holofernes, who is this king and military commander that is about to destroy them, and similar thing, ends up murdering him in the tent. And that's what you see in 150. And it's bloody, and this, by the way, is in the Uffizi Gallery. There's also a copy in Naples. It's almost the same. It's two different versions of the same painting. They're very similar. It's in the Museo de Capodimonte, the Capodimonte Palace Museum up on the hill there in Naples. It's you can see the pain of her life really come out in this painting. And that's her maidservant who's helping her. But it brings it down to earth. Like if you're sawing somebody's head off, it might be an important and glorious moment, but it's going to feel yucky while it's happening. And that's what you see here in this scene. And then the next one, 151, is them with the head trying to get ready to sneak out of there. And you see more of that as the two of them are leaving in 152. So that's Baroque painting. Obviously, there's way more to this. There's a Renaissance that's going on in Northern Europe and other places as well. Spain, with artists that have different takes on things. It's going to look different from these Italians. But if you're making a trip to Italy, especially the parts of Italy where we're going, Rome, Naples, Florence area, you're going to see a lot of this amazing art. And I truly appreciate you being here. What else do I need to say here at the end? Help me out here. Come closer so that you're by the microphone. This is Mrs. You got dressed up for today. You actually, this is Mrs. Lewis. She's amazing. She does all the behind the scenes stuff for the Learn with Mr. Lewis channel. I keep saying she should be the one that's at the forefront because she's the eye candy.
I dressed up today.
Anyway, Thanks. Hopefully you learned something from this. This will be available in my live section,
Yep.
right?
So in all of your videos,
I don't know this stuff. So.
in all of your videos, you'll see it in his live section. So it'll be there. I just received a question as I was walking over here about where you can view all the paintings. And so again, that was a link to a PDF. So we'll go ahead.
I was meant to mention that along the way.
That was so it's in the description. It's in the chat. We'll go ahead and put that link. Make sure you have that
Well,
link.
it's
there.
already there, right? Mm-hmm. So you can click on the link and it brings up a PDF. It's all numbered. I mentioned it at the beginning, but I know some people weren't on, and I meant to mention it a few times along the way. That was part of your job.
Oh, I had
to
so
remind
many
me.
jobs. But anyway, thank you. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties
We
at the
did.
beginning, but I think we figured this out.
So we will never do it again.
All right.
Maybe someday. All right, so thanks again for being a part of this. I can't believe I made it in just about 2 hours exactly. The goal was, it felt unrealistic because I have a hard time shutting up, was to crash course us through Italian art and architecture. We had to go back before that for it to make sense. Anyway, you can watch this again and again and again. I'm sure you'll want to, and you can follow along with your images. We don't know how to make them appear on your screen. We don't have that technology. Maybe someday. I mean, it exists. We just don't have it. But anyway, thanks again. And if you have any further questions, they can still ask questions, right?
In the comments.
In the comments, and I can get back to you on those. All right. This is Mr. Lewis signing off.